So I'm going to be talking today a little bit about the digital disruptors. John's already mentioned a few of them, and specifically certain questions relating to their business. So while we've been talking about the disruption that traditional media has been facing, many of these disruptors have challenges of their own to overcome. So 4 questions I've been asked to have a look at today. So can Netflix sustain its growth? Does Amazon's motoring show investment make sense? Why hasn't Apple, or anyone else indeed, launched a cable killer in the US or anywhere else? And what's happened to all these tech content megamergers we've been hearing rumours about for the last decade? So on to Netflix to start with. So can Netflix sustain its growth? So if we look at Netflix so far and the number of customers it's been adding quarter by quarter, you start to see its home region. So this is the number of new subscribers added to the Netflix streaming service every quarter. So you can see back in Q1 2011, that was the peak when they started switching people over to the streaming service en masse. But obviously the trend since then, despite some seasonality, has broadly been down. So Netflix is now hitting saturation point in North America. Nearly half of US broadband households now have a Netflix subscription. So, of course, it's been sustaining its growth via the global rollout. So, first up, Latin America, and you can just see that pushes it into growth up until 2014, and then starting to tip off again. Western Europe, following behind, you can start to see, there we go, levelling out now, 2015, 2016, beginning to drop off again. So, of course, more markets. Asia, and then the rest of the world. So now Netflix is adding more customers than ever. But that's it, no more markets, with the exception of China, which Netflix has indicated where it expects relatively modest uptake of its service. That's it, no new customers to access in new markets. So it's got to rely on upsell of its services within those territories. And as we've seen from here, that can drop off pretty rapidly. The other thing we should have a look at is how much money can be made from subscription video on demand. And this is very relevant to Netflix. So what this chart represents is effectively a scatter plot. On the y-axis there, you can see the average revenue for a typical pay TV customer. So how much money is made per month from a pay TV subscription. On the x-axis, you can see quarterly GDP per capita. So what you can see there is a positive correlation that as a market's income increases, the amount that the pay TV services are able to charge also increases. It makes sense. People have more money, more disposable income to spend on subscription TV services. So Netflix, of course, with all of its advanced analytics and the huge amount of algorithms they can pump all their data through, has obviously got a very, very apt and sensible pricing structure across their international territories. So maybe not. What's happened with Netflix is they actually haven't adjusted their price points to reflect local market income. So this is the same chart, but for Netflix's price points across different territories. And what we can see there is there's absolutely no correlation with the local market income, so it's not priced appropriately for local markets. Now, at the beginning, that may be okay, because really they're targeting in many of the emerging markets some of the higher wealth households that have broadband. But as time goes by, they're going to struggle, because across many of these territories, some of the biggest markets in the world, so Russia, India, parts of Central and Eastern Europe, Netflix is actually more expensive than your typical pay TV subscription. So it's a vast change to what we expect from Europe and North America, where Netflix is largely accused of undercutting pay TV. It's certainly not in many of these markets. It's a premium service. So the other thing that we need to think about is actually how much content and what content is Netflix making available. So this chart shows the proportion of titles on Netflix across a handful of markets that are of a local origin, so that are produced at least in part, in those territories. And you can see that's actually in decline as well. So not only is Netflix not pricing appropriately in markets, it's not really localizing the content. So what does this mean? Well, there's an upside for this, of course, in that Netflix has obviously done extremely well without making appropriate pricing moves, without localizing content. So over the next few years, what we'd expect is better content localization as it needs to grow within markets, better price discrimination across territories as it tries to target different consumer groups, and potentially in those existing high-value markets that it's saturating in, new tiering, packaging, perhaps even the advertising models that John alluded to earlier. So a few things for Netflix to think about over the next few years. So onto the arch enemy. So just before Christmas, I thought, well, I've got to buy a few Christmas presents for my family. And I thought, well, actually, I'm going to be buying a lot of them online, probably via Amazon. Why don't I sign up for Amazon Prime and take advantage of the free delivery? And I raised this with my wife, and she said, you can't do that. Why not? So I was very puzzled about this. And I said, well, why? And she said, you know why. Okay, is it because of their tax issues? Is it because of the worker treatment? I was like, no, you know why. It's because of him. So obviously at that time, Jeremy Clarkson was advertising Amazon in preparation for the new seasons of the motoring show that Amazon's paid $250 million for 3 seasons of. But my wife sort of hit on an interesting point there, because I was interested in buying or taking out an Amazon Prime subscription from the perspective of getting delivery, so retail aspect. And she was thinking about this from a video content perspective. And that's where Amazon and Netflix are obviously fundamentally different businesses, that Amazon is at heart a retail business. We may think of it as competing in this space on the strength of its media assets, but actually at heart they make the vast majority of their money from retail sales. And content is a means to an end for them. So if we look at what Amazon makes globally, so they're on about 100 billion worldwide from the retail business. Now, they have quite significant costs. So Amazon's actually not making an awful lot in terms of the bottom line once you take into account the cost of sales and delivery for its services. So the margins there are about 12% for Amazon on any individual retail sale. So what does this mean for content acquisition? Well, what it does mean is that it's all related to how much Prime customers spend. So if we take the Prime market, so Amazon, as we saw from the previous slide, making about 100 billion in retail revenue each year. And then we look at what the 2 sets of customers within its portfolio are spending. So you've got the 60 million Prime subscribers worldwide versus about 240 million Amazon accounts. They're not Prime subscribers yet. Your typical Prime subscriber, on signing up to Prime, doubles their spend. So they're spending about twice as much as your average Amazon account. And with that 12% margin we talked about, that means that each Prime subscriber is worth about $67 to the bottom line. So the very act of converting someone over to an Amazon Prime subscription is worth a fairly substantial amount to Amazon. So what does this mean for its content investment? Well, obviously, the content investments are not just about the amount that people spend on the core Amazon Prime subscription. They're about that number, the retail business. So if we think back to the amount that they're spending on unnamed motoring show, about 1.2 million Amazon Prime, fresh Amazon Prime subscribers offsets this cost. So I don't know about you, but that seems roughly achievable for Amazon. Now, the number could be a little bit high, could be a little bit low. It depends where those customers are coming from. But that's not a number that particularly scares me in terms of Amazon getting new customers in from investing in a pretty high-profile show. So does the investment make sense? Quite probably. So next question. Why hasn't Apple, or indeed anyone else, launched a cable TV killer yet? So I think this could be framed as a question for the content market. And it's been a question that's been asked by many news outlets for a number of years. So we can see back in the Wall Street Journal in 2009, we've had the Apple TV service proposal, get some nibbles, Apple's new TV deals, create bigger cloud, Apple in talks again to offer TV channels, web TV service in the autumn of 2015. Not sure what happened there. So what's happened? Why hasn't it, or indeed anyone else, launched a cable killer? So by which I think we're talking about a replacement for a typical cable TV service. So we're not talking about Netflix that has a library of content. Some people are cutting the cord but supplementing with broadcast TV. We're talking about a full-scale replacement, pay TV channels and all. That hasn't appeared. So if we look at the US pay TV market, this is the subscription pay television market, traditional services like DirecTV, Comcast, etc. It's actually not doing too badly. Despite the declines in the market, it's still above the levels that we saw in 2004 and 2005. So is it the right time now that the market's tipped into decline? You could say, well, perhaps we shouldn't be launching into a declining market, but I think there's another reason for this, and it's a matter of geography and infrastructure. So firstly, the US cable market, indeed this is also true for the Western European market, it's about bundled products, not just about TV. So if you look at any of the individual cable companies or telcos out there, they will sell multiple products to their customer base, triple play products. So if you look across some of the biggest bundlers in the US, Cablevision is selling an average of 2.7 products to its typical customer. So that will be TV, broadband, telephony. And even down at the low end, you've got Verizon at about 1.8. And actually, that's probably a bit of an underestimate because they also upsell DirecTV to their customers as well. So what? Can you not just take the TV out of the equation? Take the TV service out of the equation, just keep your broadband and telephony line? Well, maybe, maybe not. So in the US, I think this is where the problem stems. So the US is obviously the largest TV market in the world. So if you're going to launch a cable killer, obviously it's going to be the market where that's most appropriate for testing that out. I'd say actually the US is probably not the most appropriate market for this because there are some fairly significant differences with the way the US market operates versus the rest of the world. And one of those is geography. So at heart, the US broadband market appears to be a pretty competitive market. So if you compare the market shares of some of the leading ISPs in the US, it doesn't look particularly bad. Now, if you look at a European market, you might find the incumbent telecoms groups has got 30-40% market share, whereas here, the maximum's 23%, 16%, 13%. Doesn't look too bad. But actually, at an individual state level or an individual geographic level, it matters very much. So what I'm showing you now isn't some bizarre weather map. What this is a snapshot of part of New York. And the idea is it's showing you coverage of the different companies. So we've got Verizon broadband up there, we've got Comcast there, AT&T, Charter, Cablevision, Time Warner Cable. So all big names from that previous chart. Now what you probably can't tell so easily from these charts is what the overlap looks like. So are they overbuilding? Is there competition? So I've kindly done that for you. On the left-hand side here, we've got the cable overlaps. In the middle, we've got where the telecoms groups overlap. And on the right, we've got where they all overlap. And so what I hope you'll be able to see, although it's a slightly messy diagram, is that actually there isn't an awful lot of overlap, particularly within an individual technology. So there's very little cable overbuild. There's practically no telecoms overbuild. And even combined, there are still quite a few areas where you can only get one service. So going back to the question of the bundle, if you're an Apple, or if you're a Verizon or an Intel trying to launch a virtual MSO, a virtual set of cable channels in the market, what happens if you launch into a monopoly or even a duopoly market? Well, if you're an incumbent cable company, what are you going to do? Well, everyone still needs to take broadband to take this new cloud TV service. So you simply raise your broadband prices, you drop your TV prices, and it makes it uneconomical for someone to launch a competing product. And because there's no competition, who's going to stop you from doing that? So I'd say actually, one of the big challenges I think about the virtual cable companies is that they're often looking at the US market and saying, well, how do we disrupt this one? It's the highest value market. And actually the geographic infrastructure and competition challenges are such that actually the international markets may present better opportunities for this, where there is more competition at the broadband level, where players will struggle to make those trade-offs. So finally, I'm just going to wrap up very briefly about the tech megamergers or tech content megamergers. So I think some of them were alluded to in one of the panels earlier. So why haven't they happened? So if we go back, again, using newspapers to provide my favourite straw man arguments to knock down why different tech companies haven't bought content firms. And I think I'm going to give you a very simplistic answer on this one, actually, and that is simply where the companies make the money. So if you look at an Apple, where does it make its cash from? Where are all its profits from? They're from the technology sales. They make their margins on devices. So in terms of what's good for Apple, it's getting content on exclusive, low cost, gets people to buy the devices. Whereas if you take another sort of service, say a Time Warner or a studio, they make the money on the content. So what's good for them is having a whole array of low-cost devices that you can deploy across the nation. You can start selling content in. So what's good for both of them? Perhaps some sort of exclusivity for certain content or special features. So that's already been done through licensing deals. So I think what we are finding is that we've seen a trend towards the reverse, so investments in technology firms. And I think these were already dealt with quite well in the panel earlier. So we've seen Sky make investments into VR, into ad tech, and so on. We've seen RTL make a range of investments in the ad tech space. And we've seen Disney start to launch a whole range of initiatives designed at building up companies that will help their business over the next 5 to 10 years. So with that, I'm going to finish the presentation and hand back to John for the panel. Thank you. Thanks very much.
Please stay on stage. We've got time for a question. Anybody got a burning question they want to ask of Richard? No? I've got one pre-prepared. Shall I use that? Oh, lucky. So obviously, one of the things that's been discussed a fair bit this morning is the idea of cannibalization. What do you think about the risk of self-cannibalization to some of these big companies? Is it a bad thing?
It's a good question because I think a lot of pay TV operators and indeed traditional broadcasters are terrified of being perceived to be self-cannibalizing. So if you look at the pay TV services themselves, they don't mention their subscriber numbers to the Now TVs or the Viaplays of the world, and I think that's because they perceive, perhaps quite rightly, that their investors are going to react badly to what is potentially self-cannibalization. But I think they're doing entirely the right thing by launching OTT services, even if there is a little bit of self-cannibalization in the short term. Largely because it positions them very well in the 5 to 10 year timescale when all the viewers are going to be using these multi-screen solutions. So I think there's a good argument to be said that not all cannibalization is bad.
Yeah, so your typical innovation is actually good for you. Sorry. Okay, well, thank you very much, Richard. A round of applause.